guys, we're back and we're going to talk about how Jackson attacked the national bank. Now, woo doggy, does this guy do some damage to the national economy? Flashback to the time period before this called the era of good feelings, where we were feeling good, everybody was making some money, we were all connected. Yeah, Jackson's going to ruin that entire thing when he tries to take down the bank. All right, so let's talk about how the national bank came to be in the first place all the way back to Washington's time. That is when we had Hamilton write out the plan for the national bank and what it would be in charge of. The reason we like national banks is because they provide a currency for us. They give us a way to borrow money, in other words, having credit, and they stimulate the economy by making it easier to trade, sell, have a market, all of that great stuff. But part of the signing of the national bank gave it a limited number of years to run. So the first national bank that we had enacted actually had only a 20-year charter, which means that Congress every 20 years had to come back together to agree to pass the next national bank. So in 1836, the national bank was supposed to expire. In other words, they had to come back together as Congress to put it back in session. And these two guys, Henry Clay and Daniel Webster, want to introduce the bank earlier to Congress to make it a campaign issue. We are going to have an election in 1832 and 36. So they want to introduce it so that they can run against Andrew Jackson and talk about the need for the national bank and how great it is. If you remember, both Clay and Webster are nationalists, so they're going to ride on that era of good feelings coattails, talking about how great the bank is. Jackson, on the other hand, is extremely skeptical of the bank. He calls it a privileged institution. He says that he's going to kill it because it favors the wealthy. And if you remember what Mr. Payne said about Jackson and the age of Jackson, he is all about the common man. He is a Democrat. He is for the people, the average citizen. So some of the things that the national bank at this time is allowed to do that would make Jackson hate it is the national bank held all of the taxpayers' money. So all of the tax refund stuff would all be held in the national bank. Some of the average citizens could not participate in getting loans from the national bank because they did not have enough money, so it didn't benefit them. And this allowed the national bank to extend loans to people like congressmen or businessmen, entrepreneurs, people who had the means or the capital to be more trustworthy than the average citizen with their money. So Jackson is going to see this as evil and want to tear down the national bank. So when Clay and Webster introduced the national bank and its rechartering, they are under the assumption that it's going to pass just like that. When they do pass it in Congress and it goes to the president to be signed off on, remember our checks and balances, Jackson is going to veto that bill. So he says, nope, we're not going to recharter the Second National Bank. It's an evil institution. We don't want it. What he does instead is create these things called pet banks. So one of the members on the president's cabinet is the Secretary of the Treasury, and Jackson is going to replace the Secretary of Treasury with somebody who gets on board with his plan of pet banks. Now, what a pet bank is a bank that is loyal to the Democratic Party, in other words, loyal to Jackson himself. He is going to get back at the national bank after vetoing its rechartering by taking all of the money out of the national bank and dispersing it into these loyal state banks. Now, I want you to think about that for a second. That would be like taking all the money out of today's banks and putting it into specific state-only banks. That is not good for the national economy. That is going to make us very sectionalized. In order to get back at Jackson for doing this, the Bank of the United States President Nicholas Biddle is going to try and get all of his money back from loans that he had lended out. He's going to say, all right, if you want this money, then everybody we've lended money to needs to pay everything back right now. If you just started a business and you have loans from the bank saying, hey, I need the repayment for the $10,000 you borrowed last week, there's no way you're going to be able to do that. So what this in turn ends up doing is Everybody is scrambling. You had businessmen, entrepreneurs, congressmen going to Jackson being like, please fix this. And Jackson's response, of course, being the petty man that he is like, go talk to Nicholas Biddle. He's the guy causing all of your problems. So when all these people flood Nicholas Biddle and his national bank policies, he's going to be forced to lend out money that originally he wouldn't have lended out, because now he doesn't have the backing since Jackson removed all of the money from the bank to put into his pet banks. Um, since the national bank is no longer functioning, it is going to be turned into a regular bank and shut down. So it becomes the Bank of Philadelphia, just another state bank. There's nothing special about it. It can't lend any money for national reasons. It can't sit there, for example, and let us buy anything from foreign countries because there's no national bank for the national government to borrow money from. And then it's going to end up going out of business after about 5 years. Um, so effectively, Jackson really did end up shutting down the national bank. In response to this shutdown, you are going to have a group of men who have hated Jackson since day one come together to form their own political party. It's called the Whig Party, and they are going to be people who back nationalistic policies from the era of good feelings. So your leaders are going to be people like Henry Clay, JQA, Daniel Webster, all people who had been really big in growing the nationalized foreign policy, economic policies, all of that during the era of good feelings. They want to bring the nation back together. They're tired of this nitpicky president who is going to sit there and favor certain policies or states over others. And they end up actually creating this political party right here that I want you to look at. That's called King Andrew the First. So if you notice, it's dressing him up like a monarch. As on the side of veto memory, born to command, had I been consulted, basically pointing out that he's acting like a king. He's standing on the Constitution, he's standing on the US Bank, and in his hand, I know you can't really see it that well, but it's a little piece of paper with the word veto on it, because Andrew Jackson is the president that does the most vetoes out of all other presidents combined before him. Um, so pretty impressive guy, goes about his own way doing things, and because of him, we then create the Whig Party. So that is a big effect of the presidency of Andrew Jackson. Let's talk about what happens after him, because he goes down as like the celebrated hero of the American people. He represents democracy. He gives power to the common man. But of course, when he steps down from the presidency, you got other people who have to pick up after him. His VP, Van Buren, Martin Van Buren, is going to run for presidency with Jackson's support since Jackson can't run for a third term. Um, Martin Van Buren is going to win. The Whig Party that tries to go against him can't even pick a single person to run the presidency or run as a candidate. So 3 people actually end up running against him, which makes it super easy for the Democrats to come together and elect Van Buren. The problem here is that under Van Buren's presidency, we are going to see how bad the decision to shut down the national bank was. He's going to get the nickname Martin Van Ruin for his disastrous term. He only gets 1 term because it is that bad. So let's talk about Jackson's legacy and how he pretty much screwed over his VP. The pet banks, those state banks that Jackson had handpicked for being supporters, they have no idea how to run a bank with the amount of money that they have. So let's back up a little bit and talk about how banks actually work at this time. They are backed by silver and gold. So in order for paper money to actually have value, you have to have something else of value to equate it to. So for example, if I have $5, the way that I know it's worth $5 on the market is because of how much gold that actually equates to. And in pet banks, each of these banks had a specific amount of silver and gold. It was a finite amount. So when you print more and more paper, that finite amount hasn't changed. All you've done is lessen the value of the paper that you're printing. So that's what we're talking about when we say things like inflation and why you can't just print $1 million off. It's because the value equated to it hasn't changed. You've just lessened the amount that the paper is representing. So what these pet banks do is what every bank should never ever do, and they teach you this all the time in economics, They print so many banknotes that the money that people are getting is pretty much worthless. Um, because people are defaulting on their loans, they're unable to pay it off because there's no real money value left. The federal government has to pick up the check and start picking up the payment. Um, to try and control this, Jackson and later on with Van Buren are going to demand species payment. Species is payment in gold and silver only. So no longer can you show up and be like, "Ooh, here's my paper money that I got from the bank," because they had printed so much of it and it's worthless. You now have to go and exchange all of that paper money for actual gold and silver to prove, like, "Ooh, hey, look, I have something of value here, I promise." Um, so when Jackson says, yeah, you can only pay for your stuff in gold and silver, everybody rushes to the bank. Now remember, there is only a finite amount of gold and silver in each of these banks. So you had people running to these banks with all of these paper notes that they had gotten from the bank saying, hey, I need this to be exchanged for the gold and silver. And the banks are sitting there being like, ooh, wow, we really screwed up because we don't have that much gold and silver in here. So really your paper money, we can't do anything with it. So they go so far as to say, yeah, we're not going to take your paper money anymore. Sorry about it. Our bad. So people are going absolutely insane. And what this causes is a panic, which is a negative blip in our economy. So the Panic of 1837 ensues. Banks start to close because there's nothing in the banks of value anymore. They don't have anything to back it up because since Jackson said he only accepts payment in gold and silver, they gave their gold and silver to those who had gotten their first paper money. When banks close, you can't borrow money anymore. So I want you to imagine today how things would go if you can't go to a bank and buy something with a credit card. That's happening right now with the coronavirus. We've seen in our economy today that most people, when their job shut down, they don't have an emergency fund. They don't have anywhere they can go to be like, oh, yeah, let me just pull out my money really quick so that I can live off of it. No, people are living on credit right now and borrowing more money to try and get through this kind of crisis. So imagine if the bank shut down and you couldn't borrow money. You wouldn't have anywhere to go to get money from. So we collapse our system of credits. People lose their savings. When a bank closes and they can't repay any of their stuff, people don't get like an IOU. People just lose their savings. It goes into the banking system. So you had thousands and thousands of people who now have lost their savings. Businesses start to go bankrupt because if there's no savings, there's no spending. So businesses don't make any money, and more of a third of the population goes out of work. You guys are living in a true economic recession right now as we see the devastating effects of the coronavirus. So, if any of you are interested in this, follow what's happening with the economy. See what the government does to try and fix this. So, let's see what Martin Van Ruin tries to do. Oh, excuse me, I used his nickname. I meant Martin Van Buren. So, Van Buren is going to try and solve this economic problem by reducing federal spending. So, I want you to think about that for a second. If businesses are going bankrupt, is it in the business's best interest to stop spending money? No, because that means the business, even more so, cannot make money because nobody is spending. That is why at the beginning of this coronavirus epidemic, when people were saying, oh, yeah, save money. No, 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 no. That's not good for the economy. And that is why the government decided to give out a stimulus check. It is called stimulus because what is it supposed to do? Stimulate the economy. Spend your money so that businesses don't go under. So all of the people out there who are saving it or paying off their debt, while that's actually a very, very smart way to use your money, it's not good in this situation because you're not stimulating the economy. Anyways, back to this. As we see, it's going to make the problem worse. It causes a drop in prices and a higher demand for limited gold and silver. It's not going to work out. So the economy continues to go under. Thanks to his disastrous ruin, Martin Van Buren is not going to win a second term, and we're going to flip political parties. The Democrats do not win the election. The Whigs win, and it is with William Henry Harrison in 1840. However, Harrison's not going to last long. He tries to revitalize the economy, but then dies of pneumonia after 9 months of being president. That is why you don't deliver the inaugural address without a jacket. He thought he was invincible. He just said it was a light cough. He dies of pneumonia. Come on. All right. He's going to be succeeded by John Tyler. John Tyler's actually a Democrat. The only reason the Whigs picked him to run as a running mate was so the South would vote for him. And he's actually going to oppose most of the Whig economic plans, which is why we're going to go into a wild array of economic ups and downs in the 1840s and 50s. We'll talk about that in the future. But as for right now, you see Jackson's legacy. Not only was he a man of the people, but he also ruined the national bank. We'll be back in a little bit to talk to you guys about another revolution happening at this time called the Market Revolution. So stay tuned.